Welcome to the show. My name is Clash Roddy, and tonight is it's on Friday night. We talk about African mindset. It's all about looking at different factors that have affected the African mindset, both in the past, in history, in the colonialist period, and right now. And I still have all my guests. About six of them will be joining me tonight to discuss this particular topic. We'll be talking about the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and World Bank role in facilitating neocolonialism in the African continent. More on this in just a moment, right after this. Thank you very much. Neocolonialism is reality. It's not myth, it is reality because there are a lot of superpowers that still want to have influence in the African continent. They want to have that influence on the political stage, on the economy, and in many other settings. And that's something obviously that is problematic because it means that many of African countries still have very important matters being decided outside of the continent by people whose interests are not always aligned to the interests of the African people. So, as usual, I've got a few guests with me tonight. I have Eugene Ullman that has been with us for quite some time now. He's a filmmaker, documentary maker. He's in Sydney. We have Dr. Matthew Mabefam, who is an anthropologist and lectures at Melbourne University. We have Katinda Ndola, who's how do I put it, an author and a speaker who speaks a lot on self-confidence. And also we have Bertrand Abiakare, who is a community leader. He is the current president of the Burundian community of Victoria. We have Kumbi Mukaro, who is in finance. He's a senior financial person. He will talk about a specific role in a moment. Not sure if it's a financial advisor or financial specialist, but she specializes in superannuation. That I can remember. And we have Mustafa Barry, an engineer, also a community advocate in Melbourne West. Good evening, gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening.
All right. How's everyone going tonight?
You better get that right, okay?
Yeah, I better get that right, man. I'm still too much into the gentleman mindset. I gotta change my mindset. All right, so let's kickstart this with a simple question. What do you think the role of the IMF and the World Bank has been, or how important has that been? How crucial has that been in facilitating or hindering neocolonialism in Africa? Anybody can go with that.
Yeah, I think probably I will give it just a little bit of a try. The IMF and the World Bank were born historically from what they call the institutions of Bretton Woods, which were kind of an attempt to create an international international financial institutions to regulate the world, or to assist the world in getting back into kind of sort of financial order, I think, after the Second World War. I think from then on, actually, the role actually has evolved to something a little bit more towards kind of providing loans or assisting kind of countries that are in financial strife or in economical strife into getting out of crisis. Now, this is the preamble that we have kind of that you have officially. Now, in terms of the role of those institutions in our countries, I think the history in the past 50 or 60 years have shown us kind of a different a different picture of what they're doing. I think in many countries it created more long-term social and economical problems than solutions, because the conditions that they impose on the countries that are borrowing from them are so drastic and sometimes so disruptive socially, that countries find it more to get out of crisis than more difficult to get out of crisis than anything else. It focuses more on paying debts, on making sure that your balance of payments is actually kind of positive more than anything else, and that hasn't been positive for our countries. In the context of African countries, it's been a disaster. So that's what I can say. I'm sorry, I've been probably too long.
That's all right. So it has been a disaster. Anybody agrees?
Completely. Yeah.
Go ahead, Eugene.
No, I think it definitely has been a disaster, because the I mean, I'm not a huge expert on every detail of how the IMF and the World Bank has operated, but we've seen example after example where they are essentially acting as, the police force of capitalism, if you like, to make sure that the African role, the African position in this kind of like global hierarchy is maintained, and it can't be changed. So we've seen, very sort of, leaders like Jerry Rawlings in Ghana, accepting loans from the IMF with all these conditions, and basically abandoning every policy that he may have had or may have envisaged for his country. I think the biggest problem with the IMF is that it is not in favor of any kind of social guarantees or economic guarantees for the population. It's all about, user pays. These are the conditions. So, for example, in Zimbabwe, the one of the worst examples, I think, of this was ESAP, the Economic Structural Adjustment Program in the 90s, the Zimbabwean government under Mugabe was never a left-wing government, but they did have certain things like free education and investment in the healthcare system and so on. And the IMF forced them to abandon all of this. And very significantly, and this happened in Malawi as well, the governments that have programs to monopolize grain, to buy grain at fixed prices from the producers so that they have grain reserves for when there's drought, for example, to avoid famine. According to the conditions of these loans, all of these guarantees have to be sold off because it's a market economy. And as a result, when there's famine, people starve. Whereas when there's drought, people starve, not famine. When there's drought, people starve. In Australia, we have drought all the time and people don't starve. But for some reason in Malawi, in Zimbabwe, even though they had these systems in place to guarantee food supplies, they were forced to eliminate them by the IMF. So those are just a few examples, but there's a lot more. Tanzania is another example.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Feel free, anyone, to speak.
I want to add on to what Eugene and Barry have said, and really and I completely agree with you, what you guys have pointed out. An important thing is to look at the structure, particularly of the IMF. We've sort of zeroed in on them, and look at the voting rights. It's interesting to see how much, what voice the African countries have on these organizations. It's the superpowers, if you will, that have the majority of voting rights. And it really speaks to whether an organization that does not give the voice to particular countries can actually be an advocate or be aligned to what their true needs are. Because to me, it seems, that Zimbabwean example that you give, it seems to me very clear that there's no actual know-how of what would be suitable in the country, because who was making those decisions about what policies are ideal?
If I may come in,
Yeah.
If I may come in, it's I want to talk about the IMF and the World Bank as the two institutions that have, if anything, have created some kind of economic dependence to many countries of Africa. if you think about it, they were the ones that were providing money for government to run, services and things. And for them, they had the power to regulate how many employees you can have in the country, and how much money you can pay them. Which means, that they are really controlling you indirectly using their money. One other thing that makes me feel like this institution have been there for some hidden agendas is the fact that, for example, a country like China had to take a long time to be allowed to increase its shares in those institutions, until China decided to create its own banks as a response to get some power, some economic power back home, instead of relying on these institutions that were really not in the favor of having more money to help more countries, but having that money that is not enough to help just the countries that they favor, with conditions that are always in favor of those who are providing those monies into those countries. For example, when you think about some countries in Africa or in developing countries that were able to get significant amount of debt, those countries that were able to give away their natural resources, for example. So in exchange, someone goes behind somewhere to lobby for you to get some money from these institutions. So for me, that is not a fair. It's not a fair practice, but because it's a big institution, it's very hard to even say that. But it's happening behind our backs.
Sure. Kumbi or Dr. Matthew or Katinda, any of you?
Well, I wanted to actually add.
Yeah.
Oh,
Go
Dr.
ahead.
Matthew, you want to go ahead?
You can go ahead after that. Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add on what also Kumbi said, and what Mustafa or Eugene also Bertrand said. We know that really, I think I'm just going to talk about my opinion about the IMF and the World Banks. I think what they've created is obviously a long-term dependency on the African people, because we always obviously have corrupt governments whereby when things go wrong, we're always reaching out to them as a backup plan. So they always bail us out, which means we're getting ourselves deeper in debt because we have to pay back this. But then we're more vulnerable, because the more we get ourselves in trouble, the more we seek, and the more they give it to us. But what are the consequences of all that? What happens in the long term? Then we become nations which are owing so much money, we can't really even do anything about it, because now they're almost owners, technically. That's how I look at it. So I don't believe it's a good thing.
Sorry, I'll let Matthew go now. But just so when Katinda was talking now, I just thinking about addiction. But anyway, we'll talk about that later.
There is indeed a debt addiction by many African governments. Go ahead.
Money addiction.
Yes, Dr. Matthew.
Yeah, I don't think I can disagree with any one of you and the views that you have expressed. I similarly hold those views. And I'm not an economist, but I sometimes do wonder why there seems to be a serious disconnection between local realities and what those organizations can contribute to actually help people involved. So as Mustafa gave a very good background to these institutions and why they were established, which gives us a very good footing to be able to have this discussion. And basically, World Bank was to help fight poverty in poorer regions and improve their ability to be prosperous nations, whereas International Monetary Fund is basically a regulatory body to stabilize the world economy. And so basically, if you look at the two organizations, there are instances that they work in sync with other organizations. But what I have found across time is that there's always that disconnect. And even if their intentions are good or genuine, it does not actually help the local people. For example, one of the issues with these institution support loans is the conditions that they attach to them. And if you want to actually be a country that is supposed to be meeting the welfare needs of your people, then you are not to be able to do that with those conditions attached. We watched the structural adjustment program, and the first thing was to remove all social support networks, social support systems. That was a condition to get a loan. And how can we talk about development when the basic welfare needs of the people are removed? How is that development? You know, I find that very problematic, and I find that very harmful to the well-being of people in these countries. I think if we want to look at the worst scenario in Africa, we go to Tanzania, where you can actually see, in terms of economic indicators, there's evidence to suggest that there was economic growth, but it led to what we call jobless growth, where there were, if you look at the numbers were growing, but people did not have jobs, you know, and it was across all countries. I'm always very uncomfortable when I talk about Ghana and the World Bank or International Monetary Fund economic policies. And I say I'm always uncomfortable because I see a very huge disconnection between what is reported and what is on the ground. You know, and if you go to the ground and you ask the people, what are the real impact of this policy, you see that it's disastrous. But the policy briefs and policy reports that are being reported about Ghana paints a picture that Ghana is almost that ideal example to demonstrate that the interventions of World Bank are working. And World Bank is always using that as an example to see, well, if it's not working in other countries, it is not that their policies are problematic, but it is something that those other countries are not doing right. But as somebody who was born, educated, and grown in Ghana, I see a huge disconnection looking at the daily realities of people who live. So I think, in principle, the ideas may be good, but in practice and what I've observed, what I've read, what I've seen, it is very harmful.
Sure.
Yeah, I probably would add to that. Sorry, Kumbi, go ahead. Kumbi, I'll let you go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I completely agreed. And one of the points that I wanted to make, just making, IMF has a mandate for short-term loans. It's sort of a lender of last resort. And the World Bank is more around development. And I just had a thought about what the doctor was saying about how the difference in what the actual reality is and what the principle is. And it kept coming back to, if you look at it, the countries that are in these two organizations are actually the same. And with 187 countries, when it comes down to the voting rights, it's actually, there's a seat of 24 countries that decide many of the mandates that come out of these two organizations. And I don't believe, if anyone can correct me, that there actually is an African country on there. And I know particularly where it comes to the World Bank, there's been a lot of criticism about the environmental effects and social effects of some of these policies, which speaks directly to what you were saying, Dr. Matthew, that when it actually comes to the ground, you see that it's not beneficial. But in a report, perhaps, you know, again, it's probably asking what sort of reports you have. Many of these reports are financial reports. We haven't got to a point where people necessarily quantify in a streamlined way some other impacts, social or environmental, that come out of these projects.
Okay. Now, fundamentally, the World Bank and IMF are financial institutions, and that's business. They give loans out, and they want to get their money back with interest. Why should they want anything different if obviously the African countries are the ones that need the money, and they don't seem to manage their financial situation very well? Why should we blame them?
Yeah, that's the thing. I think that that's exactly right. I think two things there, is that the IMF and the World Bank don't only, they have conditionalities, number of conditionalities that they put you under.
Mhm.
And as part of that, one thing that they go after, and I remember in the end of 1980s until end of 1990s, when they came to Senegal, they put so many conditionalities, like I was saying earlier. In the space of 10 years, the social structures and the backbone of the industry in Senegal was completely depleted, completely gone. They either like kind of requested to shut down or to sell everything. At the end, you have massive people who lost their jobs, massive number of people who lost their job, families breaking apart, all the things, and it was a disaster. And I believe there is no country where the IMF and World Bank have been through where the situation has improved. It's always the same picture. But we always end up going back to them, always and always. And why? Because we have incompetent leaders. We have leaders who have no vision, leaders who have no kind of who don't actually spend time in finding kind of original solutions to their problems. I remember in the late 1990s, around 1998, when Malaysia was going through some financial kind of issues, and Mahathir at the time kind of wanted to revert to the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund to get some loans. They put so many conditionalities. So finally, Malaysia went back and said, "No, we don't need your help here. We'll manage it ourselves." And in a matter of actually 4 years or 3 or 4 years, the Malaysians were able to turn the situation around without the help of the International Monetary Fund, because they sat down, they put their heads together, and they analyzed their problems and they found solutions. In a space of 3 years, they were able to get out of water without the help of the IMF or the World Bank. So why can't our countries do the same? Yes, I agree. There is kind of some kind of collaboration or some kind of complicity between what we call the neo-colonial agenda and what the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund are doing on the ground. Because when you owe them money or they come to your country, first thing first that they focus on is how to make you more dependent to those countries that are exploiting the most, and they don't come design solutions that get you out of dependency of these countries. They don't kind of criticize or denounce the imbalanced kind of contracts that are there between you and between your country and other countries, where your resources are being kind of taken away for almost nothing. They don't put that into question. So it shows in actual fact that they're working in complicity. But the other thing also, we shouldn't be blaming always the others. We need to look at ourselves and see why is that we are not able to design solutions that are good for our people. Why can't we kind of have leadership that can defend our countries, our interests, like everyone else is doing? That's my problem.
I think, Mustafa, one of the reasons is that in photos, in pictures, the disaster often looks like a huge success, because it's a success for a certain elite that is benefiting from this, because obviously the conditions imposed with these loans and so on all involve liberalization. So liberalization obviously benefits the elite, and the people who are at the bottom economically, they're going to miss out. But for the elite, there's a certain opportunity where whereas previously these countries may have tried to control the economy more and may have tried to control certain things, all of a sudden now there's gaps for a certain type of international investment, for example, that weren't there before, because everything can be bought up. So now suddenly you have very impressive shopping malls, for example, and they look good as visually. They say, look, we're successful because the elite can go to shopping malls. So this looks like success. And the fact that, in the 80s we had free education and free healthcare, and now we don't, like, for example, in Zimbabwe, well, what are you going to do? Like, that doesn't, but look at the shopping mall, look at this skyscraper. Doesn't it look beautiful?
But who get there? Who goes there?
Well, exactly. That's my point. But you can sell this. You can sell this as look at how successful we are. We didn't
and
have
they know how
skyscrapers.
And they know how to put their reports together and how to sanitize everything and make sure it looks as good as it can, so that they come back and more. But one thing we have seen, when they give these loans, a huge part of the loan goes back into consultants that they've brought to manage the loan, and that's not just very striking. We're giving the money, but we're taking it back as well, because you have to employ our own people to be able to service the loan. Why have African government been accepting this type of conditionality?
It goes back to the point I raised last week on even trying to call such support as aid, when in actual fact, no. So today, I think we are getting to the crux of the issue. We call it what it is. It is a loan that is being taken, and it's not an aid. But on the question of why do we keep going back to them, and why do they bring consultants to take the money back? And it makes me refer to the question you asked before. Naively, I'm not an economist, and that's why I say naive. I always question myself whether in the thinking of people who actually manage these institutions actually want countries to be debt-free, or they want to continue to have them in debt so that it will be used as a tool of control and manipulation. I've always thought about it that way. And the reason why I've thought about it that way is that obviously I haven't done any research to confirm my own thinking. But why would you continue to give loan to somebody who does not use the loan judiciously and cannot even pay back? Why would you continue to give? Is there something more than what we are actually told or what we are actually thinking? I don't get it. So, and you realize that when these things come on the table for people to discuss, people get very emotional. I remember when Damisa Umar wrote her book, Dead Aid, people call her all kind of names. But if you read and the evidence she presented, that was the fact. There's nobody who can contest what she put on the inside that book, you know. But people always get emotional, and they've called her all kind of evil names and those kind of stuff just for telling the truth. So the question is, who is telling the story? Who is on the table? Like she mentioned before, if you have an institution that is purported to have a particular agenda, development in developing countries, and they don't even have a voice, how does that even work? We are talking about giving people voice, diversity, inclusivity. How do you decide for somebody in this era that the person who is even supposed to be supported is not even part of where those decisions are made? I don't get it. Maybe somebody can explain it for me.
Anybody wants to explain it to him?
I think that's a question we're all asking ourselves too, because how can people sit at the table, talk about you and your problems without involving you? It's obvious to us that obviously that means they know what they're doing, and they just want to make sure you're more dependent on them, and you have no choice, because literally, like you said, you know, we get more loans, we can't pay them back, but you still get more loans. Then what does that mean? It means
just to sinking you more and make you more addictive, and that's a problem. I think the whole thing of the Berlin Conference in 1865 or 1885, I think it's 1865. It's the same picture that is continuing, where our problems are being discussed without us being present, where our fate is being decided behind our back. But the only thing that makes it worse now is because we are made to believe that we do have our own leadership. But whereas, like, kind of the people who are leading us in most cases are people who are blatantly incompetent, and everyone knows that they're incompetent. And those neo-colonial kind of countries are the ones that are actually supporting this regime to continue to be in place, because they know by them continuing to be actually in power is going to help them more pushing their agenda. And that's the problem. You know, we don't have our destiny in our own hands still at the moment, you know, whether economically, whether politically and all that. That's a huge problem. You know, and we need to fight the problem in both ways, both on our side and on the other side.
On their side.
We do have a lot to do. We have absolutely a lot to do.
All right, let me remind those watching. You're watching African Knowledge here at African Media Australia, and tonight we're talking about neo-colonialism. It's part of the series on analyzing the African mindset. We're looking at some of the tentacles of neo-colonialism in Africa, and specifically the role of the IMF and the World Bank in perpetuating, neo-colonialism, at least on a financial and economic settings within many of our countries. So I have got 6 guests with me who have been regular commentator on this platform, and we're talking about this topic now. We encourage you to share this feed through your network so more people can have the opportunity to watch. And also, if you don't mind, just put a comment, tell us where you're watching from. That helps us to analyze our audience data. Okay, so we need to look at both ways. Barry has said, but who's to blame more? Is it us or them? I think Africa is to blame more than the IMF and the World Bank. They're in business.
It's true. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a transaction. It's a transaction between two parties. I know when you look at individual transactions, you want to have two meet at the same level, equally empowered. And this question of power, which we covered last week and even the week before when we were talking about women, comes up again. Power or perceived power. One of the things when it comes to the IMF and the World Bank is often there's a political strain involved in their decision making, and these loans and the policies attached to those loans are provided to countries at times that have a strategic advantage for those countries to provide those loans. Like in history, we've seen perhaps where, I know during the Cold War, Haiti got a number of loans from the World Bank because Haiti at that point was a strategic addition to the US's position in the Cold War. And when we had September 11 in 2011, again, Pakistan was a strategic move for the US to be able to make their way to Afghanistan. And in those periods, those countries received favorable loans with soft terms. So you see from the side of the lender, there's that possible collusion of what is their intention and integrity. And then when it comes to the receiver, in the case of our countries, when you look at Africa, there's many cases where the government is in power, is happy to take on those loans and have enjoy that influx of cash coming in, and then the next government then inherits the loan and the debt. So, and in that way, I think that's where we need to look at that perception of power, because I can imagine those politicians involved probably think it's a great thing, and they may play a similar role to the consultants we talked about, that they're popping some funds there, and they probably think this is wonderful, but long term really isn't wonderful for the countries.
Yep. Anybody wants to add something on that? Are we to blame on this?
I just want to
go ahead.
Yes. Just wanted to refute the idea that these banks are here for business. I want to really, say that these people are not into business, because if they were into business, I read somewhere that China was refused to enter to increase its shares into those banks for 10 years. Like the U.S. Congress will vote it down every time they want to increase. They go no. So any bank that really wants to be into business in terms of making money, it will welcome cash to come in so that it can have more capital.
Increase their capital.
Yes. But these people are not into that. They are into control, more control than business side of that. And when you think about this control, you can easily see, and my colleague here was saying, how the countries that have something, natural resources, something that is where they can pick, the loan that they get is enormous and easily with less conditions. But those ones that are really trying to build and get somewhere, it's very hard to get any money from them. And to me, that is an evidence that this is not a business thing. It's power, it's control, it's that monopolar world system that they want to promote. Thank you.
Okay, before anyone adds, before the next comment, let me just add, there was a case recently in the Congo where the former general manager of the biggest mining company in the Congo called Gécamine gave an interview to Radio France, where he was saying that the IMF forced the Congolese government to break the Gécamine's structure into smaller companies, and they said that they needed to do that because that would help with better management, and they didn't have, and the Congolese government didn't have sufficient capital to be able to, develop the mine. So, and they recommended that partners to come, and so with the intention apparently to work with the Congolese government to develop the mines. What happened is these so-called partners who came because the IMF said they will bring capital. They actually didn't bring any capital. They took the mines of the Congo. They they presented it as guaranteed to get loans, which they obtained for about 1 to 2%. But then they charge the Congolese government for that same loan. It's 10%, and in the end, both the money that the Congolese government had to pay and the financial partners who came to sort of work with the Congolese government to develop the mine, everything ended up that these new partners ended up becoming the owners of the mines, and the Congolese government is getting less than 5% of the mines, cobalt and all these other things. That is revolting.
It is revolting, and that's what's happening in all our African countries. It's like kind of all these countries, European countries, Western countries, ganging up and just taking as much as they can, and we're just sitting there and watching. I think we are involved in a game where our leaders don't understand. They don't understand the complexity of the games, and they end up with nothing because they actually don't understand the rules of the game. They don't understand how they're being manipulated. That's the main problem. That's a huge problem in many countries, and especially in Senegal. It's exactly what's happening. With when you're talking about the gas, or you're talking about the oil and everything and all that, we end up getting like 5-10%, and they make you believe. Actually you got a good deal with that.
But Mustafa, do you think that it's the leaders don't understand, or do you think that they're doing okay because they've got their
share
them that's making their part? They're doing all right.
That's where I have a problem, where they think that they're doing okay because their families are doing okay, that they're getting a portion of this 10% and all that. That's the problem. I mean, they're not thinking about the country. They're not thinking about the people. That's the problem. That's what I find very, very appalling.
And that's exactly the that Mr. Ma makes, and I like to refer to her because I like her word. He says because these leaders know that even if they don't listen to their people, they will give them the money, and so whatever you complain, they have a source of income from somewhere else. They're just so interested in themselves to the extent that, and that again, when we were talking about business, we're using the term business in a very loose term, taking into consideration the power, the interest, the politics that are all involved. Obviously, it's because of what they stand to gain. That's why that field is so restricted that China was not allowed to increase its rate, its share before China went to create its own. It's all kind of control power, and it's all extractive in nature, and it actually fits into the topic that we are discussing today. It's the continuation of exploitation or just taking the resources away, and we have internal enablers who partner with them to do that. So those who are the victims of all of this is the ordinary citizen, it's us.
That's
but
right.
for our leaders, and then they are all benefiting. They have all the money, they've taken, whether through corrupt means or what, they've received their portions of the money. So whatever the rest of us complain, it looks like we are living in different worlds, which is highly problematic and immoral.
Yeah.
Now, in Australia, banks and loan providers who act irresponsibly, or who are found to have unconscionable conduct, obviously they are subject to big fines
they can't
from
get away
the
with it.
regulator. Should we then have some sort of regulator on the international level to watch over what World Bank and IMF, all these other so-called business?
It's gonna be the same game again, Clyde, because you will have the same people who will look at the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Normally, they should be making sure that this ethical thing is done in a fair way.
Yeah.
But these institutions, you look at the preambles and the purpose and all that, they completely have failed. So if you wanna put together a police or whatever to make sure that the game is played fairly, you're gonna be having the same people who are gonna get there and playing the same manipulative game, because they all work together. I think at the end of the day, everyone will have to take responsibility. I was actually thinking of something like more pushing the responsibility back to us, to our international, to our regional, international kind of institution within the African continent. We do have the so-called African Union, and Matthew, I'm sorry, I'm still pessimistic about the African Union, because I think it's a fallacy. They should be playing a role in that. I mean, why can't they? The same way they have kind of rules and regulations in regards to a standard when you take in power, if you do a coup d'etat, you are subjected to sanctions, you are subject to this and that, Why don't they have similar rules when it comes to managing our resources for the interests of our people? Why can't they put an advisory board to help those governments who are not capable, who are unable to understand the contract that they're negotiating, to help them out, to make sure that anything that we sign in our countries, because we're talking about Africa, and if we are united, if it's true we are united, we need to care about our people, and each of us, the organization needs to be in a position where it can be on the side of the people for the interests of the people. If in Congo or in Senegal, the government goes and get into something that they've been advised to do that is not beneficial for the people, the international branch of the African Union will, the monetary or whatever police of the African Union will come into it and say, look, this is not right. This is not the way we should bring it. If you do this, we're going to sanction you, or whatever it is that they should do. And the regional organization should do the same role, should play the same role. Create a template where people or countries that don't have a clue can refer to and get at least some guidance on what the best approach, I don't know. They're probably dreaming, but I think that's the thing that will help us, because no one will come from outside to help us. Those Western countries won't come and help us for our own good.
By the way, just talking of the African Union, there are 6 of us here, or 7, including myself. I'm interested to know who in this group is satisfied with the work of the African Union.
I don't have to say anything, because you know my opinion.
Anything you say will be used against you in a court of law.
I have to say, honestly, I'm not aware of the work of the African Union.
Sorry, say it again, Kumbi.
I am not aware of the work of the African Union.
That's it.
Okay,
they have meetings.
I know what that means.
And they have
Beltran,
meetings.
Sorry, Eugene, what did you say?
No, I said they have a building and they have meetings.
I know.
I know what that means. All right, Beltran, what do you say?
It's should I say that this is another disaster or disastrous institution that we have on the African continent?
Because it's just a joke. It's a joke.
All right.
Yeah.
But to be fair, though, nobody ever mandated the African Union with those power. Like, there has to be an agreement first about, or some kind of consensus, because the general kind of idea that people have of, not just in Africa, the trickle down, thing, that if you create millionaires and you create wealth, then they will create, jobs, and somehow that wealth will trickle down, to the poorer people and so on, which I think that's been debunked and disproven, but there's still this general idea that creating wealth and creating billionaires and all this is like a positive thing. People are proud of, look how many billionaires we have in our country, so there hasn't been this agreement yet about what constitutes success for Africa. What does success mean? And so then there's nothing really for the African Union to enforce up to so far, because no one has sort of discussed what's good and what's bad for the whole continent per se. I agree with you. I think obviously the resources need to be protected and so on, and it's absurd that countries with like the largest numbers of minerals on the planet are asking for loans. It's madness. But but the African Union has never at any point agreed on any kind of vision for like, where do we want to be? That hasn't happened yet. It's
And
just
that's exactly right. And that's the saddest things, because that's exactly what we're saying here. Because they don't have that vision. They have never been able to have that vision. That's why I consider that they're just a waste of time. They are a waste of space.
But let me just quickly mention here, they do have Vision 2060, I think, from memory. They've outlined a number of things that they want to achieve with Africa. Maybe I'll let Dr. Matthew make a comment, because he's like the defender of the AU in this platform.
I don't know where Nola stands. I might be the lone ranger on this topic, whether Africa has listened to all of you. It's clear where you all stand. But I'm not so afraid to take my own journey. Sometimes it's okay to be alone in your thoughts.
Yeah.
I think
that's okay.
You see, Dr. Matthew, you laughing yourself. You're laughing because you're finding it probably hard to find an argument.
You don't have to be nice to everyone else.
Yes. So I think what I would want to say is that we have to go back to find out what exactly is the mandate of African Union, or even Organization of African Unity. The mandate is a coordinating body. And if you judge African Union or Organization of African Unity from that point of view, they are a success. They've managed to be able to coordinate the different aspects of African countries. First and foremost, what was the rationale for forming Organization of African Unity that must oppose to African Union? It was the answer to the political question, which was independence. So after Namibia gained independence, that ambition or that role was achieved. That we have to be very clear. Then we move to the second part, which is economic independence. And with regard to economic independence, one of the things that we have to realize that African Union is just a coordinating body. It does not have any power to force any country to engage with any deal if the country does not want. And that's why, for example, even with the establishment of the Free Continental Trade Center that has just recently been created with its headquarters in Ghana, a country like Kenya is deciding to have a backside lobby with US. African Union does not have that power to punish Kenya to say, we have all agreed to do this. Why are you tending to do the negotiation on your side? That's not its role. Its role is the coordinating factor, and it's doing the coordinating role very well. We can ask for more because there's never enough in the bowl. So we can ask for more. So I think that we can ask them to do more if they haven't thought about it, but I will not say that it's a failure. I think in terms of coordinating, they are a success.
Well,
yeah, can I say something to that? Can I say something to that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just very quickly, what I can say, I'll go back to the independence, okay? Yes, in 1963, the objective was to achieve independence and freedom for all the entire African continent. Yes, although that's true, but also that's in 1963. In 1963, almost all those countries that were not liberated individually had already engaged in a struggle and a fight to gain independence, independently of the African Union. What did the African Union as an organization or coordinating organization has done to liberate those countries? They haven't contributed to the war in liberation in Algeria. They haven't in any shape or form contributed in liberating Guinea-Bissau. They haven't contributed in any way, in shape or form, in liberating Mozambique or Zimbabwe or whatever. The neighboring countries individually of those countries are the one who, from their own goodwill, have helped liberate those countries. And in some instances, some countries actually have collaborated with the oppressors, but the African Union haven't said anything to those countries. When Jonas Savimbi was doing what he was doing in Angola, some African countries were actually helping Jonas Savimbi. The African Union haven't done anything at all. When Gaddafi was attacked by France and the other countries, the African Union haven't raised a finger to do anything at all. So where can we say that the African Union has succeeded in any coordinating role?
I think
from 1963 to date, I don't see it.
Can I just say one thing before you go further? We will have actually a whole edition, a whole show next. I mean, if not next week, the week before, the week next on the African Union. So because I think it is actually very important. Perhaps we're putting too much expectations on them, or perhaps they have not been able to understand what Africans really want and therefore adapt, strategies to be able to deliver what the African populations want, rather than satisfy the needs of the leaders who go there and have a party and have these conferences and actually end up doing nothing. But I'll let you comment. Just we're going to have a whole show about this, I think.
No, that's fine. So I won't say too much, but I think that I in a sense, I'll agree with Matthew in the sense that the African Union, from what I understand, has not claimed to be like an African parliament or an African government, like a united thing. It's essentially a place where everybody can meet on a neutral ground and talk, right? As the United Nations is as well. They can't really enforce anything, right? It's just that whether you're at war, whatever your conflicts are, you come to the UN and you leave your guns outside and you have a conversation and everybody can meet. So I think the African Union, if that's the only thing that it does, that's still an important thing. That's still providing that forum for a conversation without the power to enforce things. I think, yeah, there's still a role for that, and there's still an importance for that.
Okay, we got 10 minutes to go, and I would like us to sort of put our solutions caps on and trying to look at how we think African government, African professionals, African population, civil society activists, what do they need to do to try to kind of address this situation of these institutions and the powers behind them to continue to exercise this negative role in bringing loans that end up really actually doing more harm than they help the African communities.
Clyde,
what's the solution?
I think I feel like the problem with Africa is leadership. We don't really have leaders who can claim they're doing a good job. They happen to be there and everybody's in it for themselves. We've had this discussion. They come in power, they make the monies, they do the deals with either IMF or World Bank, and they do their cuts. So they don't worry about the vision of the country, and they don't worry about people. They don't. And I think it's also like an African problem. We don't have a long-term vision of what our future should be. We're very short-term people. We just look at what we can get while we're here now. We don't worry about the future. And that is one of the biggest issues, I think, with most of us, but also the leadership. We don't have good leadership.
Okay. Leadership is, I suppose, everything comes down to leadership. But how do we actually help to foster a better leadership for our country so that we actually get a bit more than what we have? And that leadership need to be exercised both from the side of the African government as well as on the international stage. The IMF and everyone, all these people talk about ethical behaviors and professionalism in everything, but when it comes to money, it's a different story.
I want to go back to mindset, which I think is always it's a good title for the discussions that we have. I think mindset comes very strongly into this discussion. I just had an analogy from the perspective of IMF and World Bank. The African countries are a high risk proposition. We've made comparisons with banks, and if a bank were lending to someone that has a high probability of not paying back that loan, even if you look at alternatives and think, what might the African countries, who might they look at instead of going to these organizations? It's still the same proposition of you are essentially high risk. And if we need to remember also that when our countries go and approach, it's not mandatory. They still choose, it's a choice to go and approach the IMF or the World Bank, that they're doing it as a matter of last resort. So that again comes back to mindset. And, we pointed out that many of our African countries are rich in resources. So what's going on where that there's an agreement of saying, well, actually, you know what, I am not rich in resources. Here I am, and I'm compelled to take this loan that's onerous. And I'm compelled, even if I do get this loan at an individual level, as far as our representatives, to run away with the money and misappropriate it. So I think it really comes down to mindset and just starting from a grassroots level of we actually have something to offer. We actually have resources, whether it's looking, and this might play a part with the African Union, which I am not aware of the work they've done, that we could actually look amongst other African countries for other alternative ways of approaching this. And I think if you would have a different mindset that enters into the tables of these discussions and forums, we might have a different outcome.
Sure. I'll just take a quick comment from John Arrow, who's asking if anybody in this group has studied economics. I suppose he's wanting to make a point that it's all about economics.
I have.
John, if you want to, if you're still watching and you want to make your point, you can actually call. There's a number on the screen, and we can get you to hear what you would like to say on this. If you are still watching, we're live now, so just call that number, and we'll let you make your point. But I suppose it's important to understand that all of this is about our, I suppose, inability, or how do I put it, inefficiency in terms of creating economic success in our countries. Because if we were economically successful, if we were able to raise, our economic level, then we wouldn't need loans that much, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's exactly where the point is. We need to make sure, like in terms of solutions, we need to make sure that we have good governance in our countries, good governance of our economies, good governance of our kind of financial situation, governance of our politics and everything. The day we will have that, and we will have the balance, the checks and balances to make sure that people don't mismanage the little that we have or the much that we have, we wouldn't be in a position where we're dependent on people loaning us. We shouldn't be. So that's the whole thing, and that's probably an internal kind of battle that we need to fight to make sure that we have leadership that that our countries deserve. That's the one thing. The other thing also, if we need international organization or institution that can provide advice and balance and all that, whether it's financial, economical, why don't we start working on it? We do have the African the Africa Bank, that's
The African
the Africa
Development Bank.
The Africa Development Bank, which is basically very successful. It's an experience that is successful. Why don't we start thinking about something like this, so that instead of us turning to International Monetary Fund or to the World Bank, we can have to turn to our own institution that we have put together ourselves to see how we can get those kind of assistance between us. I think until we do that, we will be always dependent on others. And first and foremost, we need to make sure that we are not dependent on loans at all. But if we do, it would be best if we can turn to our own people. That's what I'm thinking.
All right. Beltran, go ahead.
Yes, I want to come in for two things. First, I wanted to somehow acknowledge the pressure under which the presidents of our countries are really under. I happened to have I participated in a meeting. It was like a workshop that was led by a president of an African country. For 5 hours, he was talking to us. And I remember one thing that I observed, it is that there is a lot of pressure outside onto these people to do what they want them to do. If they don't, they sponsor some people to come in and take them out of power. So under that pressure, somehow, a lot of people would not really want to take the risk, so they just do whatever it is easy to get first of the loans, but also stay in power, because that's what happens when you're on the wrong side. You can't stay there long. See our dictators that are on the African continent that have been there for 40 years. Nobody speaks about them. Nobody talks about them. They're still changing constitution and getting there. But the person who is there and whom the people are really happy with, that nobody wants them. They go, no, go. And a lot of, publicity against them and all these things. So this has been a very powerful weapon that these countries have been using to get some leaders under that into that bondage somehow. So
okay.
I don't think that they don't understand, but I think there is some kind of control over them somehow. So the same applies to the African Union. what do they have? Do they have any money? No, they depend on the EU for everything. The EU has the power to really get them to shut up when they don't want them to talk. So if we want to get out of this bondage, we need to talk about it. It's not written anywhere. I was able to go into that meeting that this guy was leading. It's the president, sorry, but if I hadn't been there, this would never be written anywhere. So nobody knows what is happening. We feel like our leaders are corrupt, but maybe not. Something else is happening in the background. So we think to write about this so that the future generation can understand, and maybe then they will really rise up and say no more. They will be like China, and they will say, if you don't give us the way to put in shares, we create our own banks. Africa will create its own banks maybe one point. It's not now. It's not under our generations. But,
sure. So that's a fair point. The control, and that gets me thinking about the role of the diaspora in trying to bring any change in that, because obviously when we talk about that sort of control mindset that is sort of guiding or influencing the decision makers within these institutions, and which are also connected with Western governments, and many of us in the diaspora, we know that we could potentially have some lobbying activities ongoing, happening to trying to do something. Is there anything the diaspora can do in that sort of aspect, or any other aspect, in trying to solve this problem?
I think, like I mentioned last week, the diaspora is already doing a lot in terms of developing their various countries. And the amount of money that is sent as remittances back home actually is more than what we get from other countries as well. So that's already a lot that they are contributing to the development of their countries. I also think that
but that's more on an individual basis, Dr. Matthew. That's the money that we send, which is usually individually, mostly to our families and stuff like that. But on a collective level, is there anything more that can be done?
I would be a little bit skeptical to say that at the macro level, there's something that the diaspora can do to change the landscape of things in their various countries. And I'm a little bit skeptical because I think that we all play different roles. And the macro level engagement with our government development should be the role of the government. And we realize that is not working because they take these loans and these loans remain in the pockets of the government. So the money that the diaspora actually sent to their individual family, it gets to those who actually need it. And I think that's where they take the impact. But I think diaspora, if our countries need expertise in any area and they know of any diaspora person, they can ask the person to kind of help them in shaping something. I know of a president in one of the African countries that I will not mention the name. And he has a list of everyone from his country that's abroad. And anytime he needs any expertise and he knows you have it, he doesn't ask anybody to call you. He takes the phone and he calls you. We want you to come and do this thing. And you have to go. You cannot say no, So I think that's where I would think that we can contribute to. But that was my last point in terms of conclusion, is that I think neoliberalism as both economic and political ideology is not helping African countries as the way we currently apply it. We need to blend with social support systems so that those who are not able to participate in the market to meet their needs can be taken care of. Across the world, the only country that is closest to the model in Africa is the US. If you look at Australia, they have social support systems to support those who cannot function or are not able to take care of themselves, either because they don't have jobs or some issues. So I think as African countries, we have to think about how we can blend social support system with this neoliberal market enterprise so that the two, we can get to meet the needs of those who want the market and those who want that kind of system. That would be my conclusion on that.
Yeah. Anybody else who hasn't made any comment? I think that's pretty much it. And we've unfortunately come to the end of the show. It's almost 3 minutes past the hour. As much as we want to talk about this, because it's obviously very important. But time is time. And I want to thank all of you who have continuously made yourself available to discuss these important topics for the destiny of Africans, whether in the continent or in the diaspora. And we will continue this series for as long as it is needed. And I've received even a few suggestions from the community about other topics that are actually very, very important. And I think we need to consider how, besides obviously the discussions and the knowledge and insight that I shared, what's other potential action that can be taken to try to influence change. Many of these things are huge things that it's very difficult to see any change soon, but any little thing that any one of us can do, including just what we're doing now, sharing these insights and ideas, it's something that potentially can lead to some change in the future. So thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. I'm getting this right this time, not just gentlemen. Yeah, I appreciate your time, and we'll see you again next Friday for another edition of African Knowledge, and specifically talking about mindset. Thank you.
Bye-bye for now.
All right, for all of you watching over there, share our video, comments, subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you want to share something with the community, contact us. We may be able to give you a platform to do that, as long as it adds value to the community. Until next time, stay safe and stay blessed. Thank you.